Who let this old woman in here? The bride's voice cut through the soft hum of the jazz band, sharp and cold, snapping every head in the glittering hall toward the scene. Crystal lights shimmered across the ceiling, bouncing off the fitted white gown that hugged Lami's slender frame. Every step she took was caught on camera, her smile curved with pride. But there, in the middle of all that luxury, a frail figure stood frozen. The old woman wore a faded Nigerian dress, the fabric fraying at the edges. In her hands was a small basket of wildflowers. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, offering a single stem as a blessing. Her silver hair was messy, her face weathered, but in her eyes glowed a quiet gentleness. "Get out. You're bringing bad luck." Lami's voice rose as she stepped forward, her hand shoving hard into the woman's shoulder. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few guests lifted their phones to record. The music stopped. The old woman stumbled, but her gaze never wavered, deep, steady, as if she knew something no one else in that room could imagine. And in the next breath, a truth would surface that could shatter the entire celebration. The room held its breath. Lami's shove had sent the frail woman a step backward, the small basket of flowers nearly slipping from her grip. A murmur rose among the guests, the kind of quiet gossip that spreads quickly in a crowd too polite to speak openly. Two security guards in crisp suits stepped forward, each taking one of the woman's arms. She didn't fight. She didn't speak. She simply looked at Lami one more time, as though memorizing her face. The hall's music faltered, the soft jazz turning into an awkward silence before the band tried to start again. At a table near the front, Ade, the groom's best friend, leaned forward. Something about the woman tugged at his memory. He had seen those eyes before, though younger, sharper, filled with a fire he could not place. He glanced toward Tay, the groom, who was across the room talking with a group of investors. Tay had not noticed the scene at all. The guards led the old woman out through the side doors, and just like that, the wedding celebration tried to stitch itself back together. Lami tossed her head, her smile snapping back into place as she turned toward the cameras. But for some, the image of that frail figure lingered. Outside, on a wooden bench under the hotel's grand awning, Nyasha sat with the basket of wildflowers resting in her lap. Her back curved with age, her fingers curled loosely around the woven handle. She took a slow breath, the cool air of New York carrying a faint smell of rain and exhaust. Years ago, the air she breathed had been heavy with the dust of Lagos. Tay had been just a boy, chasing a worn soccer ball down the narrow streets near their home. His father, Kunal, had been a factory worker, steady and proud, until the day the factory gates closed for good, the day the pay stopped. Nyasha had been more than a wife and mother back then. She had been an operative, working quietly in a shadowy branch of intelligence. Her missions were dangerous, but she never let that world touch her family. Until one night, it did. The assignment had gone wrong. Names had been exposed. Enemies she had never seen now knew hers. And worse, they knew Kunal's. They knew Tay's. Nyasha had come home to find a note slipped under the door. A single line written in black ink. "We know where your boy sleeps." There had been no choice. She left that night. No goodbye, no explanation. Just the belief that her disappearance would be enough to keep them safe. The years that followed had worn her down. She worked small jobs under false names, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to leave a trace. She carried her guilt like a stone in her chest. She had missed birthdays, graduations, every moment a mother longs to see. Then, one morning in a quiet coffee shop, she saw it. A newspaper left behind on a table, the headline boasting about a young Nigerian-born tech entrepreneur making waves in Silicon Valley. His photograph was there, clean-cut, confident. Tay. Her Tay. The article spoke of his innovations, his company's rise, his upcoming wedding in New York. Nyasha had traced her fingers over the print, as if by touching the page, she could bridge the decades between them. And so she had come, not to ruin his day, not to cause a scene, but to see him with her own eyes, to let him know that she was alive. And if he could bear it, to hear the truth. Inside the ballroom, the celebration rumbled on, unaware of the weight that had just stepped outside its doors. Ade's gaze drifted to the entrance, his curiosity gnawing at him. Something told him the story wasn't over. On the bench, Nyasha sat quietly, the basket of flowers untouched. She knew she could leave now, and no one would remember her face by tomorrow. But she hadn't crossed an ocean and all those years for nothing. Somewhere deep inside, she hoped the boy she left behind might still see her not as a stranger, but as the mother who had once held his whole world in her arms. And in the shadows of that grand hotel, the past waited to collide with the present. Ade could not shake the image from his mind. While laughter and music swirled back to life inside the ballroom, his thoughts kept slipping to the frail woman on the bench outside. Something about the way she had looked at Lami, steady, almost knowing, had unsettled him. It wasn't the look of a beggar hoping for charity. It was the look of someone carrying years of unspoken truth. He excused himself from the table, weaving through clusters of guests, and stepped into the cool night air. The city hummed beyond the hotel's polished driveway, car horns and the distant rhythm of street music floating in from blocks away. Nyasha sat exactly where he expected her to be, her small basket still in her lap. For a moment, he simply watched her. She was older, thinner, but there was something in the shape of her eyes. Yes, that was it. He had seen those eyes before, not in person, but in a faded photograph Tay kept hidden in his desk drawer. A photograph of his parents from long ago in Nigeria, before the move to America. "You know Tay, don't you?" Ade said quietly as he approached. Nyasha's head turned slowly. Her voice was soft, but steady. "I know him better than anyone here." Ade took a seat beside her. Up close, the years showed plainly, lines carved deep into her face, hands worn from a lifetime of work. Yet her presence carried a quiet strength, the kind that wasn't built in boardrooms or polished by publicists. "Why didn't you tell him you were here?" Ade asked. "Why let them treat you like that?" Her gaze dropped to the flowers in her lap. "Because I didn't come to shame him. I came to see if there is still a place for me in his heart. After what I did, I cannot demand it." The hesitation in her words stirred something in Ade. "What you did?" Nyasha drew in a slow breath, her eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the hotel's lights. "When Tay was a boy, we lived in Lagos. His father had lost his job. Money was thin, but we had each other. I was working in a shadowed world, trying to keep my family safe without them ever knowing the danger. But one night, the danger found us. I received a message. They knew my name. They knew Tay's. The only way to keep him alive was to disappear." Ade stayed silent, letting her continue. "I thought leaving would save them. I thought staying away would end it. But years passed, and I couldn't go back. I heard nothing of him until that day in the cafe, when I saw his face in the newspaper." Her voice caught for a moment, but she steadied it. "I had to come. Even if he turns me away, I had to try." Ade looked toward the glowing entrance of the hotel. Inside, Tay was probably laughing with guests, unaware that his mother sat just outside, waiting like a shadow at the edge of his life. "I can bring him to you," Ade said finally. Nyasha's eyes met his, hope flickering behind the lines of weariness. "If he wants to see me." Ade rose, straightening his jacket. "He will, but you need to be ready for what that means." Inside the ballroom, Tay was shaking hands with an old business partner when Ade leaned in to whisper in his ear. Whatever Ade said made him pause. Tay's brow furrowed, his eyes darting toward the doors. Without a word to the others, he followed Ade out into the night. The moment he stepped outside, Nyasha's breath caught. He was taller than she remembered, his suit sharp, his stride confident. But it was his face, the same eyes she had kissed goodnight when he was a child, that broke her composure. Tay stopped a few feet away, confusion and recognition warring in his expression. "Mother," he said at last, the word hanging between them like a bridge over years of silence. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The word mother still hung in the air, trembling between disbelief and memory. Tay's eyes searched her face, tracing the lines time had carved there, as if somewhere beneath them he might find the woman who had once held him in her arms. Nyasha stood slowly, her knees stiff from the bench. She didn't reach for him at first. Her hands remained at her sides, clutching the handle of the basket as though it were the only thing keeping her steady. "You are real," Tay said, his voice low. "I thought, for so long, I thought you were gone." Her lips parted, but no words came. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "I never stopped being your mother, even when I was far away." The sharp edge in his gaze softened just enough to show the hurt beneath. "Then why leave me? Why disappear without a word? Do you know what that did to me?" Nyasha drew in a slow breath. as if gathering the courage to open the locked door of her past. I left because I thought it was the only way to keep you alive. There were men who knew my name, my work, and they knew you were my son. If I stayed, they would have found you and your father. I could not risk it. Tay's jaw tightened. So you ran, and left us to think you chose something else over us. I chose you, she said, her voice breaking. I chose to vanish so they would lose their trail. I chose to bear the weight of your anger so you could grow without fear. His eyes glistened, though he blinked quickly, unwilling to let the emotion spill. Father never spoke much about you. Just said you were gone. He worked until his body broke, trying to keep us afloat. I wanted to make him proud, and I wanted to prove I didn't need you. Nyasha swallowed hard. And you have. You've built something remarkable. I saw your face in the paper, your name in the headlines, and I thought, maybe it's time. Maybe I could look into your eyes again, even if only once. For a moment, the sounds of the city filled the silence between them. A cab horn blared in the distance. Laughter floated from the open hotel doors. Inside, the party carried on, unaware that the most important moment of the night was happening out here on the sidewalk. Tay looked at her hands, at the small basket of wildflowers she still held. You came all this way just to see me? Not to ask for money, not to gain something. She shook her head. I came to ask for your forgiveness. And if you cannot give it, I will understand. But I needed you to know that my love for you never left. Even when I was just a shadow in another country, I carried you in every step I took. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing, but not vanishing. Forgiveness isn't something I can hand over in one night, he said. But maybe we can start with a conversation. A faint smile touched her lips. That's all I hoped for. Ade lingered a few steps away, watching the two of them. He could see the distance still between them, but also the fragile thread of connection beginning to form. Come inside, Tay said at last. You shouldn't be out here in the cold. She hesitated, glancing toward the glowing ballroom where moments ago she had been shoved aside. But when Tay extended his hand, she took it. Slowly, they walked back toward the doors, each step carrying the weight of the years they had lost and the fragile possibility of what they might rebuild. The moment they stepped through the tall glass doors, the warmth of the ballroom hit Nyasha like a wave. The glitter of chandeliers poured down onto tables lined with silverware and champagne flutes. Conversations swirled, laughter bubbled from one corner, but the music had shifted into something softer, more measured. A few heads turned when they saw Tay walking in with the old woman. Whispers began to ripple, like tiny cracks spreading across glass. Lami was near the center of the room, her white gown glowing under the lights. Her smile faltered the moment her eyes landed on Nyasha. The muscles in her jaw tightened. She didn't move toward them, but the tension between them hung heavy in the air. Ade appeared at Tay's side almost immediately. You're bringing her back in? He asked, his voice low but edged with surprise. Yes, Tay said, his tone firm. She's my mother. The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Gasps, murmurs. Lami's brows shot up, and her hand, resting on her hip, curled into a fist. Your mother? She said, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. You mean the woman who crashed my wedding and tried to? She didn't crash anything. Tay cut in, his voice steady but sharp. She came to see me. And if you had stopped to ask instead of humiliating her in front of everyone, you would have known. The crowd grew silent, watching. Lami's eyes darted from Tay to Nyasha. I didn't know who she was, she said, her tone stiff. She looked out of place. Nyasha's gaze stayed low, her fingers tightening around the handle of her basket. She had endured worse than this in her life, but the sting of her son's fiancé's words still sank deep. Tay turned slightly toward her. Tell them, he said softly. Nyasha hesitated, then lifted her chin. I was gone for many years, she began, her voice carrying just enough to reach the tables closest to them. Not because I wanted to be. I was part of a life that brought danger to my family. People wanted to hurt me, and through me, hurt them. I left to protect my son. I stayed away to keep him safe. I only came here tonight because I saw his name in the news and thought, maybe it's time to look him in the eyes again. There was a weight in her words, a sincerity that cut through the curiosity of the crowd. Some faces softened. Others looked away, perhaps uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy unfolding before them. Lami's lips pressed into a thin line. You expect me to believe that? that this was all some noble sacrifice. You don't have to believe anything, Tay said, his voice rising just slightly. But you do have to treat her with respect. She's my mother, and if you can't show her that, then you can't be part of my life. The statement landed with finality. The silence stretched until even the band in the corner shifted uneasily. Lami looked around, realizing all eyes were on her. She forced a smile, brittle at the edges. Of course, she said. Though her tone was thin, I overreacted. But the moment had already changed something in the room. Guests returned to their seats. Conversations picked up again, but the air carried a new current. Tay guided Nyasha toward a quiet table near the wall. As they sat, Nyasha leaned closer and said in a low voice, "You didn't have to defend me like that. I didn't come here to cause trouble for you." Tay's eyes softened. It's not trouble to stand up for family. For the first time that night, Nyasha let herself smile. Small, but real. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, she was at her son's side, and that was enough. The music had picked up again, but Nyasha barely noticed. She sat across from Tay at the small table, the soft glow of the wall sconces painting his face in warm light. He looked older than she had imagined from the photographs, but there was strength in his features that reminded her of his father. For a moment, she saw him not as the man the world called a tech millionaire, but as the boy she had once held close in a small home in Lagos. Tay leaned forward. "I need to know everything," he said quietly. "Why you left, why you stayed away, and why tonight, after all these years, you decided to come back." Nyasha drew in a slow breath. She had rehearsed this in her mind 1,000 times, but the words still felt heavy. "When you were a child, your father lost his job," she began. "It wasn't just a job, it was our lifeline. I had left the agency by then, but the people I used to work for, they didn't forget me. There were men who wanted revenge for missions I carried out. They knew where we lived." Tay's brow furrowed. "You mean they came after you? After us?" She nodded. "They made threats. I knew they wouldn't stop until they had me, and I couldn't risk you being caught in that. So I left. I disappeared, hoping it would take the danger with me. Your father tried to protect you, but without my income, life became harder. I watched from a distance when I could, but I couldn't come close without drawing them back to you." Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. "By the time it was safe, years had passed. You were already grown, already making your own way. I thought, maybe you didn't need me anymore. But when I saw your face in the news last month, I realized I still needed you. I wanted to hear your voice. I wanted you to know the truth before my time runs out." Tay sat back, his hands clasped tightly together. The ballroom's chatter faded into a dull hum around them. "All these years," he said, almost to himself, "I thought you abandoned me. I told myself I didn't care, but I did. Every birthday, every big moment. I wondered why you weren't there." "I was there in spirit," Nyasha whispered. "It's not enough, I know, but I loved you every day." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years pressing between them. Then Tay reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady. "You should have told me sooner," he said, "but I understand now. And I'm glad you're here." Nyasha felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she had carried for decades finally easing. But the moment was fragile, and she knew there were still obstacles ahead. She glanced toward the dance floor, where Lami was laughing stiffly with a group of guests, her eyes flicking toward them from time to time. "Tay," Nyasha said softly, "be careful who you trust. I don't think that woman understands what love really means." He followed her gaze. "I'm starting to see that," he murmured. As the night wore on, Tay insisted she stay until the end of the reception. He introduced her quietly to a few trusted friends, each greeting her with more kindness than she expected. For the first time in years, Nyasha felt like she was not just a shadow in the corner of her son's life. She was a part of it again. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one truth was clear. The woman who had once vanished to protect her family was now ready to stand in the open, no matter what storms might come. The reception was still in full swing when Tay finally made his move. The band was playing a lively tune, guests clapping along, but he had eyes only for Lami. She was laughing too loudly, her jeweled earrings catching the light as she tilted her head toward a wealthy investor. The moment she saw Tay approaching, her smile wavered. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone even, but leaving no room for refusal. Lami hesitated, glancing toward the guests, then nodded. She followed him out to a quiet terrace overlooking the city skyline. The air was cooler out here, the hum of traffic below faint against the music drifting from inside. Tay leaned against the railing, arms folded. "Something happened tonight that I can't ignore," he began. "An older woman came here, someone you didn't recognize. You called her a beggar. You kicked her." Lami's brows furrowed. "She didn't belong here. This is our wedding, Tay. I wasn't going to let some stranger ruin it." "She wasn't just some stranger," Tay said, his voice tightening. "That woman is my mother." Lami blinked, the words sinking in slowly. "Your mother? You told me she was gone." "I thought she was," he said. "But she came here tonight, and you treated her like dirt before you even knew who she was." Lami's lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't know. And honestly, if she cared about you, why did she wait until tonight to show up?" "Because she's been protecting me for years," Tay said firmly. "You don't know the life she's had. She gave up everything to keep me safe. And you couldn't even give her a moment's respect." For a second, the only sound was the wind rustling the edge of her gown. Lami crossed her arms, her tone defensive. "So what now? Are you saying you're choosing her over me?" "I'm saying I'm choosing respect over arrogance," he replied. "If you can't understand that, maybe we've been building this relationship on the wrong foundation." Inside, Nyasha sat at the table where he had left her, sipping water slowly, her eyes drifting to the terrace doors. She couldn't hear the conversation, but the stiffness in Tay's shoulders told her everything. She hadn't come here to break his life apart, but she could see that truth had a way of doing that on its own. When Tay returned, his expression was unreadable. He slid into the chair beside her. "I told her who you are," he said. "And I told her the truth about what matters to me." Nyasha placed her hand over his. "I never wanted to cause trouble between you two," she murmured. "You didn't," he said. "She just showed me who she really is." As the night drew to a close, Lami avoided them both, her laughter forced, her movements stiff. Tay stayed by Nyasha's side, introducing her quietly to more guests, telling them she was family. Some looked surprised, others simply smiled and welcomed her warmly. For Nyasha, it felt like stepping out of the shadows into the light for the first time in decades. She wasn't the spy who disappeared. She wasn't the mother who abandoned her child. She was simply Nyasha, present, seen, and no longer hiding. When the last song played, Tay walked her to the waiting car himself. "Stay a while," he said. "I have so much I want to ask you. And I think I'm ready to hear all of it." Nyasha smiled faintly, her heart swelling. "Then I'll tell you everything." The city lights stretched ahead, bright and unblinking, as if the night itself was urging them forward. The car ride to Tay's penthouse was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Nyasha sat by the window, watching the lights of the city blur past. For years, she had imagined what it would be like to speak to her son again, to explain the choices that had haunted her every night. Now that the moment was here, her hands felt heavier than the basket she had carried into the wedding. When they stepped into his apartment, the air smelled faintly of cedarwood and coffee. Tay offered her a seat on the deep gray couch, then brought 2 mugs of tea. He sat across from her, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "Start from the beginning," he said softly. "I want to know everything." Nyasha took a slow breath. "You remember Nigeria?" she began. "You remember your father, how he worked day and night at the shipping yard?" Tay nodded. "I remember the day he lost his job. I was 8. Her eyes softened. "That was the day everything began to unravel. He was a good man, but he fell into a deep despair when the yard closed. There was no work, no money, and debts pressing in from all sides. I thought I could hold the family together, but there were things you didn't know about me." She paused, her gaze lowering to her hands. "Before I married your father, I worked as an intelligence operative. I can't tell you every detail, but my job made enemies, dangerous ones. When they found out where I lived, I knew they would use you to get to me." Tay's brow furrowed. "You left to protect us?" Nyasha nodded slowly. "If I stayed, they would have taken you. Or worse. I had to disappear, make them believe I was gone for good. I arranged for them to think I had betrayed your father and run to another life, so they would stop looking at our home. I knew it would break both of your hearts, but I thought it was the only way to keep you alive." The words hung in the air, heavy but clear. Tay sat back, trying to process it all. "You could have come back after it was safe." Her voice trembled. "I tried, but every time I came close, something happened. They resurfaced. A threat, a shadow. A letter slipped under my door in another city. By the time I was sure it was over, you had grown, moved here, built your own world. I didn't know if I still had a place in it. For the first time that night, Tay's eyes softened with understanding. You had a place, he said quietly, even if I didn't know it. Nyasha's lips trembled into a faint smile. I read about you in the papers, your tech company, your success. I was proud, but it also made me afraid. Afraid that if I came back, I might bring danger with me again. But tonight, I couldn't stay away. I had to see you before you tied yourself to someone who didn't value kindness. Tay's chest rose and fell slowly. Lami showed me a side of herself tonight I can't unsee. But you showed me why I am who I am. The drive, the fight, the will to protect what matters. That's you, isn't it? Nyasha looked at him, her eyes glistening. And your father? Never forget him. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the city below filling the space. Then Tay leaned forward, taking her hand. I don't want to lose you again. Stay here, at least for a while. Let's start over. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. I would like that, my son. For the first time in decades. Nyasha felt the weight she had carried begin to lift. Not completely, but enough to breathe again. And for Tay, the night that was supposed to mark the start of one life had quietly become the beginning of another. It was just past midnight when the knock came. Sharp, urgent. Tay and Nyasha had been sitting quietly, the steam from their tea curling upward in the warm glow of the lamp. The sound cut through the calm like a blade. Tay stood, his eyes narrowing. When he opened the door, Lami was standing there. Her once perfect hair was loose around her face, her makeup smudged. The emerald green gown from the wedding still clung to her, but its sparkle seemed dimmer now. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes darting to Nyasha on the couch. So it's true, she said, her voice sharp. You left me at our wedding for her. Tay's jaw tightened. You mean my mother? Lami blinked, clearly caught off guard. Your mother? That old woman? No, you're lying. She's just some. Careful. Tay interrupted, his voice low but firm. You humiliated her in front of hundreds of people without even knowing who she was. You showed me exactly who you are. Nyasha shifted slightly, her hands resting on her lap. You don't need to be here, she said softly to Lami. There's nothing left for you in this room except the truth, and it's one you may not like. But Lami wasn't ready to let go. She turned to Tay, her tone changing, becoming honey sweet. Tay, you know I can be better. I can change. Everything tonight was stress. The pressure, the crowd. I wasn't thinking. Don't throw us away over one mistake. One mistake. Tay's voice rose slightly. Lami, I have seen moments like that before. At restaurants, in meetings. To people you thought didn't matter. Tonight wasn't the first time. Tonight was just the first time it was to someone I love. Her lips pressed into a thin line. So this is it. Years of planning. Building a future, and you're ending it because of her? Tay glanced at Nyasha, then back at Lami. Yes, because of her. And because of who I choose to be. I won't build my life beside someone who looks down on others. Money and status aren't enough. Respect matters. Lami's eyes hardened, but there was a flicker of panic beneath her anger. You'll regret this, she hissed, stepping toward the door. One day, you'll realize you gave up the best thing you ever had. As the door closed behind her, a strange silence settled in the room. Tay turned back to Nyasha. She looked at him, her eyes full of both pride and worry. You know, she said gently. The easy path would have been to forgive her, to pretend it never happened. But the right path, that's harder. Tay sank back onto the couch. I guess I learned that from both you and Dad. He never compromised his principles. And you sacrificed everything to protect us. Nyasha's smile was faint but warm. You've become a man who knows his worth, Tay. That's all I could hope for. For the next hour, they talked about the years they'd missed, about the people they'd loved and lost, about the life Nyasha had lived in shadows and the empire Tay had built from nothing. The city outside pulsed with light, but inside, the world seemed smaller, centered on the two of them and the fragile bridge they were building between past and present. As dawn began to creep through the blinds, Tay poured fresh tea. This is just the beginning, Mama, he said. We have so much to catch up on. Nyasha nodded. And I will be here, as long as you'll have me. For the first time in decades, the sun rose on a day where mother and son could face the world together. not as strangers, but as family. And though the road ahead would not be without its shadows, they knew now that the light was strong enough to guide them through. The tea on the table had gone cold, but neither Nyasha nor Tay noticed. The quiet between them was not the awkward silence of strangers, but the pause of two people standing at the edge of a truth long buried. Tay studied his mother's face, searching for the years he had missed. There were fine lines around her eyes, a softness in her posture. She was no longer the woman who could move like a shadow in the night. But there was still a strength there, quiet and unshakable. "Mama," he said finally, "I need to know. Why did you leave? All this time. I thought you just walked away." Nyasha's eyes shifted to the window. The first light of dawn was spilling into the room, brushing against her face. For a moment she didn't answer, as though the words she needed had been locked away for decades. "I left because staying would have put you and your father in danger," she said slowly. "It wasn't about wanting another life. It was about keeping you alive." Tay frowned, leaning forward. "Danger from what? You mean your work?" Nyasha nodded. "Back then, I was still active. My last assignment wasn't in Nigeria, it was in Eastern Europe. I had intercepted something I shouldn't have, something powerful people were willing to kill for. When I returned home, I thought I could just disappear into my family, but I was followed. They knew my name. They knew where we lived." Her voice lowered. "One night, I found a mark on our door. It was a warning. The next day, I left without telling your father the truth. I thought if I vanished, they would lose interest in you both. And for years, I stayed in hiding, moving between safe houses, taking small jobs under false names." Tay's hands clenched on his knees. "All that time, we thought you abandoned us. Dad never spoke badly about you, but I could see it hurt him." "I know," Nyasha whispered. "I read every word of the few letters I dared to send him, though I couldn't tell him where I was. Then, one day, the network I worked for burned every contact. My past was erased. But by then, I was too old to go back, too tired to fight. So I lived quietly. Until..." She glanced at him, her eyes soft. "Until I saw your picture in the paper. You had made a life. You had become everything I dreamed for you. And I wanted, no, I needed, to see you, even if you turned me away." The air between them was heavy with the weight of her confession. Tay stared at her, torn between anger for the years stolen and gratitude for the sacrifice she had made. "Why didn't you come sooner?" he asked. Nyasha gave a sad smile. "Because I didn't know if I deserved to." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city outside filled the room. Finally, Tay reached across the table and took her hand. It was smaller than he remembered, the skin worn but warm. "You should have been here," he said quietly. "But I can't hate you for trying to protect us. I just wish I had known." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "Now you do. And whatever time we have left, I want to spend it making up for those years." Tay nodded. "We will." In that small kitchen, with the sunrise painting the walls gold, they began to speak again, not about the past this time, but about the future. And though the scars would always remain, they were no longer separated by silence. What neither of them knew was that the past Nyasha had tried so hard to bury was not entirely gone. Far from it, somewhere, in the shadows of another city, a name she thought was dead was being spoken again. And this time, it was coming for both of them. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the streets still glistened under the city lights. Inside the quiet corner of the hotel garden, Nyasha sat across from her son, his sharp suit in stark contrast to her faded dress. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of laughter and music from the wedding hall were muffled here, as if the world outside this bench had nothing to do with them. Her fingers twisted together. The old habit of a woman who had lived too long with secrets. "I never left because I wanted to," she said at last, her voice low but steady. "Back in Nigeria, your father lost his job at the port. We had nothing. I was working 3 shifts cleaning offices, but it wasn't enough. Then," she hesitated, searching his eyes for understanding. "There was danger. People were looking for me. Not for anything you or your father did. Only because of who I used to be." Chike, the tech millionaire everyone admired, sat back slowly. "Who you used to be?" His voice held more curiosity than anger now. Nyasha's lips pressed into a thin line. "I was an intelligence officer. The kind of work that doesn't make it into newspapers. When I found out someone was targeting my family to get to me, I knew I had to disappear. If they couldn't find me, they couldn't hurt you." but staying meant you and your father would be in constant danger. Her words hung in the cool night air. For the first time, Chaik saw the frailty in her hands not as weakness, but as the price of a life lived on the edge. I thought you abandoned us, he admitted. Every birthday, I told myself you just didn't care. Nyasha's eyes shimmered. I cared so much I gave up everything. My home, my name, even the right to see you grow up. From inside, a burst of applause and clinking glasses reminded them that the celebration was still in full swing. Chaik's jaw tightened. And the woman I'm supposed to marry, she kicked you out, called you bad luck. She didn't even know you, and still she treated you like that. Nyasha shook her head gently. I'm not here to tell you what to do with your life. But I will tell you this. Kindness is the one currency that never loses its value. If she cannot show it to a stranger, she will not show it when times get hard. A shadow moved near the hedge, and Tund, Chaik's oldest friend, stepped into view. He had been watching from a distance, giving them space. Sorry to interrupt, he said quietly, but the photographers are asking for you, Chaik. His eyes flicked to Nyasha with respect. And people are talking about what happened. You need to decide how you want to handle it before it gets twisted. Chaik looked from his friend to his mother. The choice before him was not just about the wedding. It was about the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind of son, the kind of husband, the kind of human being. Nyasha stood slowly, her joints stiff. Whatever you choose, she said, know that I'm proud you've built a life from nothing. You proved that the boy I left behind became stronger than I could have imagined. He didn't let her walk away. Standing, he put his arm around her thin shoulders, guiding her toward the warm lights of the hall. Maybe tonight wouldn't end the way anyone expected. Maybe it would end better. Chaik led Nyasha toward the bright entrance of the banquet hall. The music was still playing, but there was an uneasy hum under it now, the kind of tension that spreads when people have seen something they know they shouldn't have. Conversations hushed as the guests noticed them. A few eyes darted between the frail old woman in the worn dress and the groom in his sharp suit. Amara stood near the center of the room, laughing too loudly with a group of her friends. She turned when she felt the shift in the air, her smile fading when she saw who was on Chaik's arm. Why is she here again? She asked sharply, stepping toward them. Her voice was low, but it carried. I told the guards. Chaik held up a hand, stopping her words. You told the guards to throw out my mother. The room fell completely silent. Amara blinked, her mouth opening and closing as she looked around at the watching faces. You're what? My mother, Chaik said, his tone clear and unshakable. The woman you called bad luck. The woman you kicked. He felt Nyasha's fingers tighten slightly on his arm, but she said nothing. Her silence was heavier than any accusation. Amara's face paled, but then her chin lifted. How was I supposed to know? She looked like she stopped herself, realizing too late that there was no way to finish that sentence without sounding worse. You didn't know? Chaik agreed, his voice still calm. But you didn't need to know to treat her with dignity. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his friends, his father's old business partners, and the family members who had flown in from across the country. A person's worth isn't decided by the clothes they wear or the money in their pocket. And if I marry someone who believes it is, then I've failed to learn the lessons life tried to teach me. Amara's friends shifted uncomfortably. A few of the guests lowered their eyes, embarrassed. The band stopped playing entirely now, the hall echoing with the weight of his words. Chaik took a step back from Amara. I can't go through with this, he said simply. There was no anger in his tone, only a quiet certainty. I wish you well, Amara, but this is not the future I want. For a moment, no one moved. Then Tund stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on Chaik's shoulder. Let's go, he said, nodding toward the side exit. The three of them, Chaik, Nyasha, and Tund, walked out together, leaving the stunned crowd behind. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp, carrying the faint hum of city traffic. Chaik exhaled slowly, feeling a strange mixture of loss and relief. Nyasha looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. You gave up a lot tonight, she said softly. I didn't give up anything worth keeping, Chaik replied. Besides, I got something far more valuable back. He tightened his arm around her shoulders. And for the first time in decades, Nyasha allowed herself to lean on her son. They walked in silence toward the waiting car. Somewhere behind them, music started again in the hall. But it no longer mattered. What mattered was that after years of separation, they were no longer strangers. That night, in a small apartment away from the glittering lights, they sat at the kitchen table with Tund, eating takeout and sharing stories. Nyasha told them pieces of her past she had never spoken aloud, about the missions, the danger, and the fear that had driven her to disappear. Chaik listened without judgment, only with the understanding that love can take strange and painful shapes. In the end, there was no grand reconciliation, no magic fix for the lost years. But there was honesty, and there was the beginning of something they could both hold on to. And sometimes, that is more than enough. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains of Chaik's apartment, painting the small kitchen in gold. Nyasha sat quietly at the table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. She watched her son move about the room, still in his t-shirt from the night before, and marveled at how much of the little boy she once knew still lived in the man he had become. For years, she had imagined this moment, rehearsed the words she might say if she ever saw him again. But now, she found that the truest thing she could offer was silence, a presence to make up for the absence. Chaik noticed her watching and smiled faintly. "You don't have to explain everything at once, Mama," he said. "We have time now." Those words were a balm. For the first time in decades, Nyasha allowed herself to believe they could rebuild something real. Tund arrived with breakfast from the corner bakery, and the three of them shared a meal without the weight of an audience, without the performance that wealth or status demanded. Later, Chaik walked Nyasha to the small garden behind his building. The air smelled of wet earth, and she bent to touch the petals of a single blooming rose. "When you plant something," she murmured, "you can't rush it to grow. You water it, you keep it safe, and one day, it surprises you." Chaik understood she wasn't just talking about flowers. "Then we'll take it slow," he said. "No more lost years." They stood there a long time, saying little, but in that quiet, a fragile bond began to mend. Whatever the future held, they had stepped onto the same path again. And sometimes, that's all a second chance needs, a choice to begin. No matter how much time has passed or how deep the hurt runs, love has a way of finding its way back when we choose compassion over pride. Second chances aren't about erasing the past. They're about building a future where the mistakes of yesterday become the wisdom of tomorrow. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If Nyasha and Chaik's journey touched your heart, please share it so others might be inspired. If someone from your past came back seeking forgiveness, would you open the door to them? Why or why not?